In 1938, in a terrace kitchen in Burnley, Lancashire, a widow lifted a cast-iron pot from a single gas ring and ladled one portion of pearl barley broth into a chipped enamel bowl. The pot held enough for 4 more meals. She had spent less than a few pence. She wasted nothing. It required no refrigerator, no plastic packaging, no supermarket delivery slot. It required one pot, one flame, and arithmetic. The 16th meal on this list was made in a Lancashire kitchen with a handful of barley and a turnip. The first was made before breakfast, cost less than a bus fare, and prevented a health crisis that now fills hospital wards. To understand how all of it was lost, you have to go back to the women who built it, not from choice, but from the cold pressure of having nothing else. The widow's pension in the 1930s was a modest weekly sum, barely enough to cover coal and rent, let alone a varied table. Mrs. E. Hartley, a composite of the thousands of widowed working-class women documented in Women's Institute circulars and household economy guides of that period, stood in her north-facing kitchen with no refrigerator, a rationing book, and a gas ring that cost money every time it lit. Cooking, for one, was considered wasteful by the culture around her. Pots were made for families. Butchers sold cuts sized for households. The domestic science textbooks of the era addressed the married household, the growing family, the Sunday joint stretched across a week. For the widow alone, there was almost no guidance, so she built her own. 1 pot, 1 burn of gas, maximum yield. The habit she developed was not frugality as fashion, it was survival geometry. And it worked, brilliantly, precisely without waste, until the abundance arrived and made the geometry feel unnecessary. That is the first and most important irony of everything that follows. The meals were born from grief and shortage. They outlasted both, and then they were forgotten. Number 16 is pearl barley broth with root vegetables, and it begins in that Burnley kitchen in 1938. 2 ounces of pearl barley, a turnip, a carrot, a pinch of salt, cold water, and the cast-iron pot. The gas ring lit once, the broth made in 1 session. Reheated across the week, each bowl thick and steadying. A Women's Institute circular from the period advised members on economical cookery for the single household, listing barley as the most efficient grain for sustained warmth and satiety. Barley costs almost nothing. Science now confirms it stabilizes blood sugar for hours, a finding that matters particularly for elderly people managing energy levels on modest meals. The pot was the intelligence. The woman who used it understood something nutritionists would spend decades rediscovering. Number 15 is oxtail and onion stew, and it entered the wartime kitchen through the back of the butcher's shop. Oxtail was the cut nobody wanted. The butcher priced it accordingly. A heavy-bottomed enamel pot, oxtail pieces, a brown onion, a bay leaf, slow cooked for 3 hours until the collagen surrendered into the broth and the meat released from the bone. Ministry of Food pamphlets of the period urged housewives to consider offal and cheap cuts as valid protein, not as last resorts, 1 bowl per night. The pot cooling overnight on the stone larder shelf. Oxtail was the cut nobody wanted. It turned out to be the cut nobody should have stopped using. Number 14 is lentil and bacon knuckle soup stew, and it came from the Yorkshire and Scottish borders tradition of making the cheap cut do the work of the expensive one. 4 ounces of dried red lentils, 1 smoked bacon knuckle purchased cheaply from the butcher's end-of-day board, a cast-iron pot. The knuckle simmered first, filling the kitchen with a smell that settled into the walls. The lentils added and dissolved into thick, protein-rich density. Domestic science teachers in the North documented pulse cookery during this period, though the specific textbook titles require verification. The pot lasted 3 days, 1 knuckle, 3 days of meals. The arithmetic was always there. Number 13 is potato and leek hot pot, and it came from the mining communities of the South Wales valleys, where allotment culture was not a hobby, but a survival system. An earthenware pot, waxy potatoes, 2 leeks pulled fresh from the allotment plot, a small knob of dripping rendered from the week's cooking fat. The leeks cost nothing because they were grown. The potatoes were stored from autumn, the dripping was reclaimed. Allotment society records from Welsh mining towns in the 1930s and 1940s document the centrality of the kitchen garden to household economics, though the specific records require research verification. 1 serving per night, the pot stored in the cool of the larder. The leek was free from the garden. The warmth it gave lasted all evening. By the late 1940s, these meals were not exceptions. They were the standard practice of millions of British women cooking alone or for small households on rationed incomes. Marguerite Patten, broadcasting on the BBC Home Service between 1942 and 1945, reached an audience of millions with practical guidance on making meagre rations work with intelligence and precision. Her broadcasts were not aspirational, they were operational. The Women's Institute, with its regional secretaries and circulated guidance sheets, functioned as a distributed network of domestic knowledge at a moment when that knowledge was the difference between eating adequately and not eating at all. The peak of this practice, the years when these one-pot meals were cooked daily, understood viscerally, passed between women in kitchens and church halls and allotment sheds, lasted from the late 1930s through to the mid-1950s, when rationing finally ended. In those roughly 2 decades, a body of domestic intelligence was built, tested and refined by necessity. Then the supermarkets arrived, then the packaging changed, then the larder was removed from the housing plans, but first, the meals themselves. Number 12 is split pea and ham hock soup, and Marguerite Patten knew it well. 6 ounces of dried split peas, 1 ham hock simmered until the fat loosened and the meat fell away in fibers, the peas added and dissolved into dense smoky gold. The hock bone reused for stock the following day. The pot provided a single bowl daily and carried a household through a working week on ingredients that cost in the post-war years just a few shillings combined. The hock cost almost nothing. The peas cost less. Together they lasted a week. Number 11 is stewed rabbit with root vegetables, and it entered the British one-pot tradition through rural economy rather than urban necessity. A jointed rabbit, purchased cheaply from a rural supplier or in many documented cases sourced from local landowners who considered rabbit a pest, browned in the bottom of a cast-iron pot with a lid, then buried under parsnip, carrot and a sprig of thyme, slow-simmered until the meat surrendered. Ministry of Food pamphlets from the wartime period explicitly promoted rabbit as a valid protein source. Single portions ladled nightly. The pot stored cool. Rabbit vanished from British tables in the 1950s. The reason was sentiment, not sense. Number 10 is tripe and onions, a northern one-pot meal so deeply embedded in Lancashire and Yorkshire culture that Bolton and Halifax once sustained dedicated tripe shops on their high streets. Dressed tripe, white, cleaned, prepared by the butcher, needed only to be simmered in milk with brown onions in an enamel pot, the milk thickening gently, the tripe softening to a texture that divided opinion but sustained generations. The pot cleaned once, the cost negligible. Newspaper columns from northern England before 1950 documented tripe shops as community fixtures. The specific titles require research verification. Tripe was eaten by millions. Then one generation decided it was beneath them, and the knowledge went with it. Number 9 is bread and vegetable pottage, and it was the meal that made waste impossible. 2 or 3 slices of stale bread, the bread bin's end-of-week contents, hard and dry, soaked in water until they softened, then combined in an enamel pot with mixed root vegetables, a spoonful of dripping and enough water to cover. Simmered until thick. The result was not glamorous. It was filling, warm, and cost almost nothing. Household management manuals from the 1930s addressed stale bread recovery as a matter of domestic competence, though the specific titles require verification. Nothing left the kitchen uneaten, not even bread 3 days old. Number 8 is sardine and potato pot, and it came from the coastal kitchens of Cornwall and East Anglia, where tinned fish was a reliable economy staple. 1 tin of sardines, waxy potatoes sliced thin, an onion, a cast-iron pot. The sardines layered between the potatoes and onion, the lid placed on, the gas ring set low. The Ministry of Food promoted tinned fish during the wartime period as a portable and affordable protein. The result was rich in omega-3 fatty acids, a term nobody used in 1938, but whose effects the women who cooked this meal understood in the practical language of sustained energy and clear thinking. A tin of sardines was 6pence. The meal it made was worth far more than anyone admitted. And then the trap arrived. In the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the microwave-ready meal entered the British kitchen. It was sold as Liberation, a single portion in a plastic tray heated in minutes. It cost between 2 and 5 times more per portion than any of the meals described here. It generated non-recyclable packaging. Research into the nutritional comparison between processed ready meals and home-cooked pulse or broth-based dishes consistently found the ready meal inferior in protein quality and significantly higher in sodium. Details that require verification against specific published studies but reflect a documented pattern. The convenience was not a domestic improvement, it was a commercial decision made on behalf of manufacturers, not households. The widow who had cooked a 4-day pot on one gas flame in 1938 had been more efficient, better nourished, and less wasteful than the person heating a plastic tray in 1985. But by 1985, the widow's method had been erased from teaching, from housing design, from cultural memory. Number 7 is kidney and mushroom braise, a post-war one-pot meal that addressed a specific nutritional need without ever naming it as such. 2 or 3 lamb kidneys trimmed and prepared, braised with field mushrooms and a sliced onion in an enamel pot with a lid. The kidneys were cheap. Awful pricing in the post-war period placed them well within the tightest household budgets. They were also dense in iron and B vitamins. Iron deficiency in elderly people is now identified as a significant and growing health concern. The meal that prevented it cost under a shilling. Number 6 is vegetable marrow and tomato bake pot, born from the allotment culture of the 1930s and 1940s at the moment of summer glut. The allotment produced more marrow than a single person could eat. Half a marrow, hollowed, filled with a mixture of tinned tomatoes and dried herbs, placed in an oven-safe pot and baked until the flesh softened and the tomatoes had reduced to a deep, concentrated sauce. Women's Institute circulars from this period specifically addressed the problem of allotment surplus and the techniques for making it last. Though the specific publication requires research verification, 2 portions from 1 marrow, the allotment solved the food budget. Then the allotment waiting list grew to years. Number 5 is chicken back and vegetable broth, and it was the meal that the butcher sold for almost nothing because no one else wanted it. The chicken back, the carcass section after the breast and thighs had been taken, simmered for 2 hours with celery, carrot and pearl barley in a stock pot until the bones gave up everything they held and the broth turned golden and thick. Ministry of Food pamphlets of the wartime period urged households to use every part of every animal. Specific pamphlet titles require research verification, and the chicken back was their evidence that frugality and nourishment were not opposites. They called it poverty food. Nutritionists now call it bone broth and charge £4 a jar. Number 4 is oat and vegetable savoury pot, and it came from Scotland and the north of England, where oats had always been understood as a savoury ingredient as much as a breakfast one. 3 ounces of rolled oats, a leek, a carrot, a cup of stock, a pinch of salt, a heavy pot. The oats treated not as porridge, but as a thickener and bodybuilder for a savoury broth that sustained for hours. Scottish domestic science curriculum documents from the 1930s addressed oat-based savoury cooking as a standard household skill. Specific texts require research verification. The resulting pot was cheap, filling, and nutritionally coherent. Scotland knew oats were not just for breakfast. That knowledge moved south very slowly and then disappeared. Here is the third and most damaging irony. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, domestic science curricula across Britain were being revised. Economy cooking, 1 pot, single portion, pulse-based, offal inclusive, was quietly marginalized in favor of dishes that reflected aspirational middle-class consumption. At the same moment, new-build council housing and private developments were removing the larder from the standard floor plan. The north-facing stone shelf that had kept a pot cool for days was replaced by the fridge freezer, which required electricity and created dependence on a machine that itself required replacement every decade. The specific year in which 1 pot economy cooking was formally removed from British school domestic science curricula requires research verification, but the trajectory is documented. The knowledge stopped being taught, it stopped being passed down. The widow's arithmetic was abandoned, not because it failed, but because abundance made failure affordable, for a while. Number 3 is corned beef and root vegetable hash pot, and it came directly from wartime Britain's relationship with the tin. 1 tin of corned beef, potatoes diced, an onion roughly chopped, everything combined in an enamel or cast iron pot on a gas ring and cooked until the potatoes softened and the corned beef broke apart into rich, savoury fragments. The Ministry of Food issued guidance on tinned meat use during the rationing period, and corned beef, imported from Argentina under the Lend-Lease arrangements of the war years, became a reliable single-household staple. The dates of corned beef rationing require research verification. The tin was on the shelf for emergencies. In wartime, every day was an emergency. Number 2 is dried bean and smoked bacon pot, and it required only foresight and time. Dried haricot or butter beans soaked overnight in cold water, then simmered for 90 minutes with a smoked bacon rasher and a sliced onion in a heavy pot until the beans collapsed into a thick, protein-dense mass that filled a bowl completely. Women's Institute guidance and domestic science references from the 1930s and 1940s consistently identified dried pulses as the most economical protein available to the British household. Specific publications require verification. 2 portions minimum from near nothing cost. Dried beans were the original slow food. The slow cooker merely pretended to rediscover them. Number 1 is stewed prune and oat porridge pot, the sweet one pot. And it was the morning meal that the 1930s kitchen built before the day began. 3 ounces of rolled oats, 4 to 6 dried prunes soaked overnight in cold water, the soaking water retained, everything combined in a saucepan and simmered slowly until the prunes softened and the oats thickened and the whole pot smelled of dark fruit and warm grain. Pre-NHS health guidance from the 1930s and 1940s addressed digestive regularity and diet for elderly people as a household management concern. Specific publications require research verification. And the prune-oat combination was understood in practical terms as a morning investment that prevented later problems. 1 bowl, enough to carry a person past midday without further spending. They knew what the gut needed before gastroenterology had a name for it. Today, the RAP Food Waste Report, with its figure of £730 average annual household food waste, documents a crisis built on the abandonment of exactly this kind of knowledge. Seniors living alone now spend proportionally more on food that spoils, on portions too large for one, on packaging that costs more than the ingredient inside it. Food historian voices and nutritionists researching the revival of pulse-based and broth-based cooking, specific contemporary commentators require research verification, have begun to describe what these women in 1938 already knew, that 1 pot, 1 flame and care applied correctly produces more nourishment per penny than any convenience product ever has. The cast iron pot sits on the unlit gas ring in an empty Burnley kitchen. The enamel bowl is beside it, clean, the meal finished. The pot holds nothing now. No packaging on the table, no wasted ingredients. Just the cool weight of iron and the smell of something that was made well and wasted nothing, and the silence of a knowledge that was built over decades and dismantled in 1 generation, and the bowl that waits.